panel is really quaint. It's the Telecom, Media, and Technology panel, which is this, we call it TMT in the Wall Street world, because they used to be three different things, right? Now they're all kind of the same thing, telecom, media, and technology. To my left, Enrique Martínez. Oh my God, I'm so nervous all of a sudden today. I haven't been nervous all day. Now I am. Enrique Martínez is with Discovery Networks, in charge of Latin America, and also now in charge of Asia. So please be appreciative of the fact that he is just back from Singapore and is living a life of jet lag, and has really done a lot to get here, and we appreciate it. Guillermo Santa Cruz is with IMG. In terms of Latin America, he looks for sports content to package, sell, monetize, buy, distribute, etc. Luis Coello has actually done business in Cuba, in telecom. He's now CEO of a new venture called CubaMobile, but he used to have a calling card business, Cuba, that he sold. Made an ill-fated attempt, along with Verizon, to run an undersea cable, which we all wish had been successful, because the internet would be so much better there now. It didn't work out for a variety of reasons, and is now working on a mobile phone company for Cuba, and hopes to do business there. So I think this is going to be really, really exciting. Tell us about trying to sell cell phones. We talked about this a little bit before the panel, but your venture is completely legal under the new rules, Absolutely. Correct? What is it?
Well, it's been, telecommunication has been legal all the time. I started in 1997 with the Treasury license and transfer of fund license from the Treasury, and we established direct routes into Cuba. And we did calling cards, we did...
via satellite, right?
Via satellite.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Via satellite. FCC will grant you a license to send a signal from the United States to Cuba, and that's the way we send the signal, and the transfer of fund license lets you pay Cuba for the services that they give you. That is the telephone service that you send them, they bill you, and then you are able to send the money down to them. Now, what we're trying to do is we're going to do a prepaid cellular business phone where you will be able to charge the phone, and you will be able to be deducting money as you go, because you will charge the phone with the money. Right now, everything that you have from cell phones is all postpaid, meaning you make all the calls, and AT&T or one of the big carriers will bill you at the end of the month.
If I go to 7-Eleven and buy a track phone, I can't call Cuba?
I don't know exactly about track phone. I'm not sure.
Because that's the prepaid that everybody knows about here, yeah?
But the people get confused with prepaid. Prepaid is the monthly or the long distance. The long distance is not prepaid right now. So no carrier is able to bill the call, is the problem. They're able to postpay it.
Yeah.
They cannot prepay it. So you cannot have money like on a calling card and deduct the money off the balance that you have as you make the call. We happen to have that software from the calling card company. So what we've done is we integrated that software from the calling card company to the cell phone, and that's why we are able to do it.
Have you launched yet?
No, but we will in the summer.
And what's the market?
The market, we're hoping probably within the first year, we're hoping about 60 to 80,000 customers.
And is that how you measure it in in call volume, in minutes, what are the other metrics?
In customers. The customers, an average bill for a customer is about $60 a month. So about 80,000 customers, do the numbers, whatever that is.
How often do they call home? They call home once a week, twice a week, once a month?
There are people that actually spend $500, $600 a month calling Cuba. There are other people that spend, $20, $30. When you average everything out, it's about $68 a month per person when you average the whole thing out.
Wow. Profitable?
Profitable.
Why? Is it a high margin? Is it you're the only one?
It's not a high margin. Cuba is not a real high margin. It's an expensive per minute rate country, but it's not a real high margin. But just volume. Telecommunications volume. It's all about volume. It's all about the millions of customers.
Got it. Guillermo.
Yes, ma'am.
The announcement happens, and does IMG say we need a Cuba strategy?
We say we need to start talking about Cuba, or taking taking it further. In the international sports market, Cuba is not unique. It is already part of a lot of things that go on because they participate in the Olympics, they participate in any number of international competitions. So they're in the conversation. They're not apart from everything. But certainly we need to look at it. The immediate reaction was, okay, now things are changing. So in terms of rights, what can we bring in? What can we take out? What are the possibilities? Where are we going to go in the next year, 2 years, 3 years? Sports is huge in the Cuban culture. There's nothing unusual about that, as it is in the rest of Latin America. So the initial reaction is, okay, where are we right now? Where are we right now, rather? And where are we going to be in the next year or so? But it's not that complicated.
You package sports content.
Right.
It's got to be baseball, right?
Mm-hmm. Baseball is key. It's not the only thing. People tend to think of Cuba as a baseball country, and of course it is, but it's not the only thing. Cuba, we've been hearing about in the last couple of years of, as far as baseball, is players coming out. So, then joining the major leagues. And that's not really, I think, what we're here to talk about, because that's not the opportunity in Cuba. It's not to mine the baseball players who are there and bring them out. It's, well, what's there that we can bring to the rest of the world? So are we talking about the local league? Is there a value to the local league in other countries? For example, English Premier League in football and soccer has a big value in the U.S. Mexican soccer has a big value in the U.S. So will Cuban baseball be of a big value in the U.S.?
I would think yes.
Perhaps.
My gut says huge.
Yeah, and the opportunity is not only in the league itself. It's going to be tournaments. It's going to be events taking place on the island. It's going to be bringing teams from other countries to play with the Cuban, either the national team or the local teams. All that will be packaged. All that will be sold around the world. All that is going to be a big part of what we're talking here today.
You hope, right?
Oh, I think I'm pretty certain of that. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We know the sports market. The sports market is a big money around the world. And we tend to think in the U.S. that sports is baseball, football, basketball, and hockey. There's a lot more sports out there. We do very well with rugby. We do very well with cricket. There's a lot of other things. There's volleyball in Cuba that's huge. So it's not just baseball.
Cuba, it's only 11 million people.
That's right.
You could do, are you lining up sporting content in other Caribbean places? Like, what is it about Cuba?
Well, Cuba is, as we've heard today, as we all know, it's a forbidden fruit. But also Cuba, I think, has its rightful place in Latin America. I think Cuba was once a big part of Latin America as far as culture, as far as sport, as far as music, as far as many other things. And it's now coming back, and it will be ready soon to reclaim that place in the Americas and in the international community. And I think a lot of what we're doing here today is a reaction to that. It's almost a welcoming back a long-lost relative. Cuba had the Cuba Open in golf. There was Grand Prix racing in Cuba. Every sport, jai-alai, all sorts of things took place in Cuba. And all of a sudden, that went away from one day to the next in the 1950s and 60s. So now we see the opportunity that it's going to come back. And we kind of it's hard to know where to start. But at the same time, baseball is where you start. Volleyball, probably, because they're very strong in that. And track and field. All sorts of other sports, and believe me, boxing, all that will be packaged by somebody around the world in different ways.
Enrique, as a publicly traded company, I can't imagine that you can move as fast as, say, an IMG can at some point, right? Because the hurdles have got to be higher in terms of the reason you would go in. What's the thinking right now when it comes to what you would do with Cuba?
You know our CEO. I think we can move pretty fast.
Yes.
The issue here really is there the right environment and framework for us to have a business in Cuba? So I think, first and foremost, we were listening to the issue of IP rights and the protection of IP. So does that become a reality? It certainly doesn't exist right now. Networks like ours, or programming from many other networks, are transmitted on the island on state-run television. So question is, are we going to respect the IP rights and rules?
And they don't pay for it right now.
Well, no. There's no business in that regard at this point. You've got something going on, and I was talking to a gentleman yesterday about it, but something called packets that are being distributed throughout the island. Actually, we were talking about it during lunch as well. And these packets are, people actually go in and download a bunch of different content from a variety of different sources. And every week it's delivered through about, I don't know, a network of 1,000 plus distributors. And people pay about $2 to go and upload hardware onto their, upload the videos onto their hardware, and or even a memory stick. I mean, you can download limited amounts of a memory stick. And people get access to, content that's very fresh coming out of the U.S. So there's clearly an appetite for a variety of different, types of content. But we know from the standpoint of, what we put together and the fact that some of our programming is being transmitted on the broadcast stations, that there's an appetite for wholesome, good value content that provides for, educational value as well. So I think it's very exciting from that perspective, but you have to realize this is not going to change overnight. There needs to be an infrastructure that gets built up, and at the end of the day, it's not a huge market, but it's the last one to conquer.
I have so many questions. Do you know what is the most popular thing that they watch from Discovery? Like, what's some of the stuff that they...
We haven't conducted viewer research on the island.
Nielsen hasn't made it that far.
Yeah. I'd love to go and do it.
They watch everything. Okay. Talk to me about the infrastructure. I mean, nobody's going to go down there and lay pipe for cable, are they? I mean, how do you think distribution?
I think the telecommunications companies definitely will, and I think they'll upgrade the plant and the infrastructure there over time. In the short term, there's probably faster route through direct-to-home satellite delivered, like a DirecTV or Dish type network. Proposition that's much quicker to adapt. Currently, satellite dishes are illegal. You can't have them, in the households. But I think that's sort of the quick route in. But it'll take a while. And as I said before, at the end of the day, it's a small market, right? I mean, you're talking about 3.5 million households, more or less. If you get to a 50% penetration level that Latin America is at right now, you're talking 1.75 million households, more or less, subscribing to some form or another pay TV. We grew more than that in Brazil just last year. So you got to keep it in context. It's the last market to conquer, and that's very exciting, but it's not a huge market. And the last one to conquer, I mean, we're penetrated into every market throughout Latin America. This one remains, so very excited about being able to get our products and our services down there.
That's why we reached out to Discovery, because you're so famous for international expansion all over the world. How do you think Cuba compares in terms of other difficult places that you've gone to? It's not rocket science. I guess at the end of the day, it's, you got to figure out what the regulatory environment is going to look like and how you work within that environment. It's different in Canada, it's different in China, it's different in Brazil. Every market, and Mexico, has its own sort of idiosyncrasies relative to the regulations around television or pay TV rules and regulations, right? So we just got to understand what are the appropriate regulations going to be within Cuba. Is there going to be IP protection and respect for the IP laws, and how fast that infrastructure is going to be built out. In the short term, I think the exciting thing is probably identifying content that we can produce on the island. There.
Absolutely. In fact, we were talking about sports. We've got 3 different documentaries that are actually being filmed right now, or have just been completed and are in post-production. So there's
Cuba.
Yes.
Cool.
Cuba. Yeah.
About what?
Well, I'm a little bit like Frank Del Rio at this point. I can't tell you all my ports of call.
Okay.
No, I'll tell you about 2. Somebody mentioned autos over here, and yeah,
Oh, natural.
How exciting,
That's
right?
natural.
I mean, automotive. So we're doing something called Cuba Chrome, and it's going to be. I think it may be the first full series that gets filmed by an American company on the island. So this is a full series. It's not a one-up documentary or anything like that. It's a series about cars, and hopefully we'll go into second series, etc. But the first one is in post-production right now. We've got another one which is probably one of the first times, if not the first time, there's a sanctioned collaboration between marine scientists in Cuba and the United States. And this will be a show that marine show, obviously, and focusing on sharks and things that we'll use maybe for a couple different things, but definitely for Shark Week, right? So that's going to be very exciting.
Shark Week is big, yes.
You got distribution for that outside the Americas? Or you need IMG to...
After I'm done airing it on my networks, we're happy to talk.
I think this is a question for both of you. Is one of the regulatory decisions that they have to make is about what they're going to do with their spectrum? Have I got that right?
Spectrum where?
Like
in here?
No, the spectrum that helps Cuba. In Cuba, how they're going to allot, like who gets to use what in terms of for telecom or for TV signals, et cetera?
Well, right now, all the communication is done through satellite, except the cable that's done to Venezuela, which, we don't know what the capacity is or whether it's being used or not. Right now, most of the stuff is going through satellite. And like he said, I think the stepping stone is like Frank was saying, you bring the ship there and they sleep in the boat, and this is the same thing. The beginning will be the satellite, where you won't need any infrastructure in the island. You could put a dish up, you can get your signal, and this is the way it's got to begin. And later on, the infrastructure will have to grow and will have to be installed. But I think that's going to take a little time.
Another component of that would be, as they move towards digital transmission, as in broadcast, transmission, digital terrestrial television, things like that, which may be another way for the infrastructure to grow quickly if they just distribute the digital boxes for people to be able to receive it and transmit the broadcast channels into digital. And then they've got the whole issue of spectrum allocation, how they're going to use that. But it could open an opportunity for content providers like us to be able to transmit through digital terrestrial television.
So we've discussed they have to make the government there, provided that they want to eventually be open to businesses from the United States, et cetera. The decisions they have to make in terms of a regulatory framework are going to be, what are they going to do about intellectual property? What are they going to do about control of spectrum? Anything else that you need to hear from them or decide about, that they need to decide about?
Well, there's no cuentapropistas in the broadcast space. You can't just have somebody build a TV station out of their house or a radio station. So you are going to need the government's involvement, heavily in this. And in every country in the world, communications is highly regulated. Whenever there's a revolution or anything like that in any country, the first thing you do is you take over the media, you take over the newspapers, a radio station, and TV station. So it would follow that the last thing you give up are the media, the newspaper, the radio station, and TV station. So that would make sense, that it's going to be a long road for them to give up spectrum, for them to be allocating channels in the private sector. I think, as you were saying, as Lois was saying, yes, direct-to-home satellite will be the play, as we've seen in the rest of Latin America. We've seen in Brazil, we've seen all over. There are challenges there because of distribution. There are financial challenges because of currency issues, that these are consumer-based business models, that if you're charging a consumer a monthly fee, how are you going to, in what currency are you going to get paid? It's very technical. But that's another obstacle that has to be overcome. You can't just have DirecTV set up shop in Cuba, and on what credit card, on what monthly payment, and how are you going to get the money out? That's an issue they're having in Venezuela. It's an issue that they're having in Argentina as well.
For different reasons.
For different reasons, but the problem is
the same.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to wait for. I think the immediate part of it will be the staging of events. So you have, for example, the New York Cosmos are going to Cuba in June. They're going to be playing the national team June 2nd. You're going to have Major League Baseball spring training in Cuba by next year. The commissioner has promised that. You can look for more football games and soccer games, tournaments, maybe one-day things that can be done and that will be broadcast. I think that will be the start of it.
Well, what about the infrastructure there for the games?
Well,
I'm guessing it's not what...
It's not up to international standards in many ways, in some ways, not all. For example, in the case of the Olympics, volleyball in the Olympics is oftentimes produced by the Cubans, because in the Olympics, they're manned by different countries at different events. So the Cubans might do the volleyball broadcast. The beauty of it is that if you don't have the infrastructure to produce a football game, you can bring it in. You can bring in a truck. You can ship in a truck from Miami. It's not prohibitive. It has been done in other places. Same as as you were saying, as the ship shows up with everything that you need. Well, you can ship everything that you need to Cuba to do a football game. It's just how do you keep it going? If you were to do a season of something, if you were to do how do you start it and then keep it going in an environment where you don't have all the things that you would typically require, as far as hotels, as far as corporate sponsorships, as far as all the things that support. Think of any, a great example is a golf tournament. Think of a PGA Tour event in your city. They come in for 1 week, and they bring in a production truck. They bring in all the resources, the commentators, all these things.
There's advertising everywhere.
Well, there's this.
Yeah.
There's this. So where in Cuba will that come from? You got to bring it in with
Will
you.
they allow it?
And the boat? Is it going to come in the boat? I don't know. That's another challenge. So I think the beginning will be a lot of goodwill gestures, a lot of experimenting, a lot of let's see what sticks. To your point earlier, why Cuba? Why not Haiti? Haiti's an open market, but we're not lining up. We're not having conferences about going there. There's this interest in going to Cuba. There's this, whether it's romanticism or an eagerness to go back to a market that was once a very important market. Whatever the reason, people are lining up. And we're here because of that. And eventually the sponsors will come because they always come.
I think this is one of the few panels that every single person today here is Cuban American. Have I got?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, how do you feel about all of this?
I think it's great. I think it's a great opportunity. I mean, we've gone through this motion now. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and we've gone through this motion now a couple of times. We did it I did it at least in the late 90s when the Clinton administration started opening things up, and now in 2009 when Obama came in and announced all the changes, and now this is the biggest one we've seen. So I'm very excited that maybe now we can really get this thing going and really carry out what everybody wants to do.
Are things substantially different in Cuba this time around, do you think, compared to the last time?
In Cuba too, I think the announcement of December was a very big news for the Cuban people, and they are talking and they are very enthusiastic, and they think that their life is going to change and it's going to get better, and I think it will if it all keeps going. If the momentum keeps going, I think it will.
Any good Cuban emotional sentiment?
Yeah, actually, yes, because I think it's very exciting, and I think the change is rooted in common sense, and I think that makes it plausible that it'll advance in a proper way. But at the same time, as the son of exiles, of Cubans, we also have to acknowledge, and we were talking about this earlier, their pain and what they went through. And as a Cuban American, you're never too far from that. That scab is always there. So I'm very excited about the opportunity. I think it's time to move forward. I think this is magnificent. But at the same time, there is also a sadness there because I know what my parents gave up to come here. And I'm hopeful that the future, for my children, who are also Cuban American, will be very different, and they won't have to recall some of the things that we did.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Guillermo. There's a bit of a mixed emotion relative to it, but on the other hand, I also have a feeling of, it's about time. And it's time to change, move forward, embrace our brethren on the island, and hopefully live happily ever after.
That's a good ending.
Get ready for questions from the audience. You're in the business that, to me, seems to have the most transformative power. The mobile phone, which has become the computer, the smartphone, et cetera. We see these pictures of the one free Wi-Fi spot that has opened up in Cuba, and all these kids sitting around on the phone. I mean, they look like any other teenager in the world. You can do banking. There's so many things you can do with that phone. It becomes a television. Yes. I'm sure you permutated to 10,000 other things, right?
Yes, I have all kinds of ideas. every day I have different ideas of stuff that we can do, but there needs to be the connectivity, and there needs to be the actual infrastructure changes so that we can actually do the communication.
What's it like how much are you dealing with members of the Cuban government? And how is that going?
Well, one of the things that I like to see happen is that the mobile phones will actually be able to access internet. Right now, they're not able to access internet unless they are close to Wi-Fi. And that's something that they need to fix on their infrastructure, and I think they will. I think it's just a matter of time, and maybe if there was some investment that the American companies could do in Cuba, that would be something that could be speeded up. Now, that has to be approved by the Cuban government, has to be approved by the American government. Right now, we are not. I hear people have offices in Cuba. I have never been able to set up an office in Cuba. I have never been able to.
Because of the Americans or because of the Cubans, or both?
No, because the Americans.
Okay.
The laws in the Treasury laws prevent the American business from setting up an office in Cuba, or it's called enhancing the infrastructure of Cuba. So if I wanted to bring a telecommunication box of any kind to Cuba, I can't. It's against the law.
Todavía. I mean, still.
Yes. Yes, there needs to be some changes. Yes, there needs to be some changes. We are not allowed to enhance the Cuban infrastructure yet.
But didn't they say you could sell telecom equipment? I don't understand.
No.
They conflict to me.
No, the telecom equipment that Cuba has is all bought from Europe, and it's all bought from other countries except the U.S.
Think about the recent incident with the gentleman that brought in a satellite phone.
Didn't go well.
Telecommunication, the only thing we are allowed to do is send the signal of the call from the United States and terminate the call in Cuba. But until 2009, we were not able to send cell phones to Cuba. We could not, send the actual unit there. Equipment, you're not allowed to send equipment. Those regs have not been updated yet.
If you're the Cuban government, do you want to buy American equipment?
Absolutely, they do.
You're not worried about. I think I would be worried about spying.
Well, I think they do. I think that they want to buy equipment, and more than that, I think that if the regs were different, I think that they would look to American partners to actually invest in the infrastructure there. Once the laws have changed, we'll know.
All right, we have time for a few questions. This went far quicker than I thought. Anybody have any questions? Right here in the front.
I don't know if you do.
Wait, let's give you a microphone.
Thank you. Discovery, you have to set up the network, and you have to probably leapfrog into satellite, at this point digital. Would you consider extending not only content, but since you're going to set up the network, going into a triple pay internet and phone carrier, if you could? Is that something the company would do?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, we're somewhat agnostic relative to platforms, so where there are opportunities to move quickly, it can be, the right path to get to the consumer. Mobile telephony. I mean, there are things that we're testing in different parts of the world. We've got a venture in the Nordic countries with an over-the-top service that we're doing, where people can subscribe to this directly. So, the platform doesn't really matter as long as there is the right access infrastructure and obviously the regulatory environment to allow us to do it.
I already identified myself, Arturo Villar, but I'll say it again. The question is this, for Discovery. You are producing programming in Cuba right now. Do you have, I would say, is this your first production effort in Cuba? Or is it something new because of this, or something new because you're interested in doing it there? And are there other companies like Discovery that are taking advantage of those facilities, et cetera?
That's a great question. And actually, no, this started well before we even knew about the change. In fact, and totally by coincidence, the production crew was on the ground. It probably took over a year period of development work for us to be able to get the Cuba Chrome program happening. And at first, there was a little bit of like, no, it's not going to work. You get turned down. We got to go back. Because we're asking for permits both here in the U.S. as well as in Cuba. But on the day that the announcement was made, the production crew was actually on the ground filming. So it was very. by coincidence. I mean, it was...
You felt pretty smart, didn't you?
Genius. So no, they were completely unrelated. I mean, the same thing with the idea of you know, trying to do something around Shark Week, you know, on the island, trying to do something about the marine life. And to answer your question, there have been very few productions, but yes, in the past I can think of another one that revolved around some marine expedition that we did also on the island several years ago.
There are sharks? There can't be sharks near Cuba. My grandmother said everything was perfect in Cuba, so it can't be.
Perfect shark.
We need sharks.
See, they're nice sharks. Okay.
If I can add a little bit to that as well, there's also the potential for original productions coming out of Cuba, of, you know, Cubans. You know, it's producing television. You know, the bar as far as the entry point now is so low because the equipment is cheap. You know, to get a camera, an HD camera, and a computer you can edit on, it's not going to cost. It doesn't cost a whole lot of money. You know, my kids edit. It's not a big stretch of the imagination. It's being done already. There are shows that are being done in Cuba that are being exported. You know, most of them are, you know, very serious, kind of like you know. Well, Conan Brown, but he's not Cuban.
As far as we know.
As far as
I mean, you said people are producing content there,
sure.
and then Cubans are, and they're selling it to who?
They're not selling it; they're broadcasting it. There's a, for example, a program called Estado de Sats, which is kind of like this. It's a discussion. It's a political discussion. They do it in a house in Cuba with 3 cameras. They take the tape from the 3 cameras. They edit it on a.
Where do they distribute it?
On a Mac. They distribute it with the same way that Enrique said, via flash drive, via DVD, and you can get, you know, they have it here in the U.S. Yeah. Flash drives, exactly. The flash drive is really, you're absolutely right. It's the way to go. And they distribute it like that, and they will gather in a house, and they will have a live studio audience, just the way Desi Arnaz envisioned it.
It's probably the last question. We got one more here. What, right over here.
Hi. There's an article that has been published in the Cuban media. I mean, several articles. Speaking of the suspicions they have on American companies like Google and other American companies. So do you actually have some feedback in the real interest in engaging with American companies and not saying the Chinese or the Russian companies that can provide the same services?
It's a great question, right? Because we're having this conversation amongst ourselves, and the other person at the table that really matters isn't here, right? I mean, we just don't know how it's all going to go. But
well, I mean, the case of sports, for example, I mean, we already do business in Cuba in the sense of, you know, they do buy the rights for the Olympics.
They do buy the rights.
They buy from IMG.
So they respect those intellectual rights.
They buy from IMG.
That IP. Soccer, do they pay?
They pay for World Cup.
They better. If FIFA's a tough organization, I don't think
you know,
I wouldn't mess with that.
They're very involved with all these. Remember, the rights for sporting events are owned by all these federations, typically based in Switzerland, and they need to be in their good graces as well because they're athletes participating in those events. So in the case of sports rights, we know that they are interested, and we do work with them, and that exchange is already taking place. There's no doubt about that. How will it expand to other areas where it's scripted content or documentary or dramatic content or telecom? That'll be a longer process. But what you're alluding to is already taking place in sports.
Guys, thank you so much. It went so much faster than I thought. I said, what are we going to talk about for 35 minutes? I mean, it was great.